So as Steve said, I'm in Michigan, and right now we're in the middle of a huge snowstorm. Last night we got 1/2 meter of snow. So usually they close certain roads if it gets like snowy enough, and now they just closed them all. So they said don't drive today. So it's a good day to be home and on Zoom. So I was involved with the Navigators in university, and then I worked at Nav Press Publishing Company for a bit. And I have ever since I've been going to Norway with Steve and Deb's McClure, which has been a gift. So it's been probably one of the favorite parts of my life, consistently. So, and I'm glad to know so many of you from Norway too. So as Steve mentioned, I loved hiking. I love my nieces and nephew. And another thing I love that you might not know is maps. So Stephen Hartwell, I don't know if he's here or not. I haven't seen yet. He knows this because he works on maps. But I have kind of like an obsession with maps. My office at work is covered in maps. So I have a map of the UK, I have a map of Norway, I have a map of Italy. I have a 1300s map of Sweden, Scandinavia, just a little fragment of a map. I have globes, lots of maps. So students often ask me why maps. And I didn't have a very good answer for my first couple of years teaching. I would just sort of say, well, I like maps. But I thought maybe I should come up with a better answer since they are asking me this frequently. And so I thought about it, and I thought one of the reasons that I love maps is they remind me there's a bigger story going on. So more going on than just in this place where I am. Today I'm going to tell you 3 stories about maps. We're going to map out the early life of the biblical character Joseph. We won't actually put it on a literal map, but we'll kind of talk about where he is. And then at the end of our time, we'll make some maps. Okay. So if you like making maps, great. And if you're not a tactile person, I'm very sorry. I make my students get out and do things almost every class period. So we do a lot of creating, so we'll talk about, last thing we'll talk about is what to do when we lose our way in the map or find it taking us to unexpected places. So I'm going to begin by reading a bit of Genesis 37 to you. So if you have a Bible and want to open it, that's great. If you don't know, Genesis is the first book in the Bible. So real easy to find and turn to. And if you don't have a Bible, no problem. I will read it to you, okay? So Genesis 37, I'm going to read verses 1 through 8 and 15. So Jacob lived in the land where his father had been a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. The boy was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. So I'll pause there to say in that time period, it was like semi-okay to have multiple wives. Not so much now. So that was the situation. So the next phrase is really important though, and it's a phrase that I didn't notice until recently. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a multicolored robe. His brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than all of his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Now Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream which I have dreamed." It's another key phrase which we'll talk about. We were binding sheaves in the field. Sheaves is like hay, kind of bundles. And lo, my sheaf got up and stood upright and remained standing. And behold, your sheaves stood all around my sheaf and bowed down. So basically there's one standing up and everyone else is like bowed on the ground looking at him. His brothers said to him, "Are you actually going to reign over us? Are you really going to rule and govern us as your subjects?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Notice that's 3 times, and that they said that they've hated him even more. In the Bible, numbers are important, and that's a lot of hatred to have happened in a short span of a paragraph. So then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. Jacob said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said, "Here I am." Then Jacob said to him, go and see whether everything is all right with your brothers and all right with the flock. Then bring word to me. So he sent him from the Hebron valley, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found Joseph and saw that he was wandering around and had lost his way. That's the last phrase to kind of camp on in the field. And the man asked him, what are you looking for? Okay, so part one, I'm going to kind of have three parts here of Joseph's story, is about being lost because of his own choices. So before we get to that, though, I'll tell you a story about a map. So I'm going to tell you three map stories along with these sort of three parts of Joseph's life. So that map is from a C.S. Lewis story called The Lost Prince, which was my favorite childhood story. I don't know if any of you read it. In that story, two children are given the mission of finding a lost prince by using a set of directions that they've been given. So they end up in a, so they're supposed to go and do all these sorts of things to find this lost prince. But they get distracted, as children do. So they end up in a giant's house where they almost get eaten. They get tricked by a witch who's really beautiful. They wander around swamps and meet a very strange swamp creature. And then when they finally get to the prince, who's supposed to be under some part of the map, they don't realize they're actually standing on the map. And so it's just kind of a mess to find this prince. So they make the wrong choice, it seems, at every turn. I liked this story as a kid because I was forgetful and I could see myself in those characters. So I think we can see Joseph too a little bit in some of the decisions that these characters made. So there's a few things I didn't notice about Joseph until I read the story this week. So I wanted to mention those things. I assume the story of Joseph is familiar to most of you, but here's a few notes that I didn't notice and are from the part that we just read. So the first one is that he critiques and criticizes others instead of concentrating on his own story. So in verse 2, I don't know if you noticed that, I'm going to go right back up to it. He said, we have, and Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. So Joseph goes and talks to his dad about his stepfamily and brings a bad report about their work. So I was thinking about it and I was like, oh, Joseph is like the guy at work that tells the boss, nobody else helped with the project. It was just him. He did it all himself. My students do that pretty often. They tell me that pretty often. Or maybe he's like a perfectionist and a micromanager and says like, no one else can do it right. So I kind of think we've probably all met those people or maybe have been those people at some time. So this sort of behavior never leads to good things. So Joseph's dad says, okay, well, that kind of helped to find out, to have you spy on the step relatives. So now why don't you go report on your brothers too? So I think as readers, we're supposed to think, oh no, this is not going to turn out well. So remember that he's 17 and his brothers are like adult men. And he's supposed to go report on how and what they're doing. So we see him already making some choices that are maybe not the best choices. So a second way that he gets lost because of his own choices is that he feels like he has to prove his position is better or more favored than others. I don't know about you all, but I found when I first started my first teaching job, which was 7 years ago, I've been teaching as a professor for 7 years, I felt like I had to prove myself all the time because everybody wanted to know, like, is she doing enough? Was she a good hire? Should we keep her here? At my university, at least after a year, your contract is either renewed or not. And then 3 years, it's either renewed or not. And then 7 years. So for all that time, I was constantly having to prove, like, I've done enough to stay. I've done enough to stay. So I think Joseph feels that too. Maybe he feels it because he's younger, or maybe he's arrogant. The Bible kind of commentary I read said that he was arrogant. That's what they took it as. But what he does is he goes and tells his brothers this dream, that his brothers are going to one day bow down to him. So he had this dream, which is okay and fine, but his brothers might not be the best people to tell this dream to. So that's kind of where I see, like, maybe he's making a mistake and who's chosen to tell this dream to. We've heard that they hate him, over and over and over. And now he goes up to them and says, hey, look, you're going to bow down to me someday. So that kind of is another way he loses his way. And then the third way that we see him losing his way because of his choices is that he doesn't pay attention. And so he literally gets lost. So verse 15, he's wandering around and has lost his way. This kind of seems strange to me. So he's in a place that is owned by his family. So a land that he should have heard about for many, many years. And so I kind of wondered, does he get lost easily? Has he not worked in the fields at all? Why is he losing his way? So I would say for us, just relating it back, I think it's easy for some of us to get caught up in the trap of comparison, or not paying attention or trying to prove ourselves, and then we miss the bigger story. Okay, so we're going to read a second section of Joseph, and this time it's a section that shows Joseph unable to see a way forward because of others' choices. So first we had his own choices, now we have others' choices. So I'm going to start in verse 16. Genesis 37:16. He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. He's replying this to this farmer that's found him. Can you tell me where they're grazing their flocks? They've moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those pits and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Reuben's one of his older brothers. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this well here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the well. The well was empty. There was no water in it. And then this last verse is a verse, again, I never noticed. I thought, I've heard this story so many times. How have I not noticed these things? Verse 25 says, in my translation, which is the Amplified, they sat down next to the well to eat their meal. So his brothers throw him in a pit, in a well, and then they sit down and eat their lunch beside the pit that they've thrown him in. So I think this is like the height of cruelty. I imagine Joseph is hurt. He's just been thrown into a stone well. I did some research on like, what were the wells made of? And they're just made of all different sized stones. And he's probably crying out, and they're listening, and they're just going ahead and eating their lunch. So I thought like, oh, I can't imagine that. Some of you were on a trip with me in Norway where I did fall into an ice crevasse. And thankfully, Steve McClure and the many other people that were with me did not sit down and eat their lunch. They like helped me get out. So here he is. They're just eating their lunch, going about their day. So they have done these things to him. Okay, so he's feeling lost because of his brothers and the way they don't care. So I'm going to go back to a map from my life. So I apparently started painting maps when I was like 4. So this obsession has gone on for a long time. So my dad read me the story of Pilgrim's Progress. Don't know if you guys have heard of that story. When I was 4, and this is the tale of a man trying to find his way from the city of destruction to the celestial city. So if you don't know the word celestial, it means like heavenly. So I painted all sorts of colors on the map. I wrote my name in like big black letters, but I didn't know what the word celestial was, and my dad didn't explain it. So I naturally thought it had to do with the sea. So I painted the celestial city as a large city underwater. So I think about that sometimes, and I think if the pilgrim in Pilgrim's Progress tried to wander through my map, he would be stuck. Okay, he would find himself like underwater. So my unknowing choice would really ruin it for him, so that the path just kind of goes off. So I would say this happens to us sometimes too. So other people's choices leave us unable to see a way forward. So that could be a breakup, could be getting fired, could be someone moving away, trauma in our childhood, trauma in our adulthood. And they actually say these types of disappointments even shift the chemistry in our brain just for a little while. But our brain releases less of the chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, that help us feel happy and energetic and engaged. So when these things happen, we are tired and sad because our brains are telling us, um, it's not going to get better. So for Joseph, it's even more than that, though. He's totally trapped. All right, third and final map. This time it's a true story. So several years ago, I moved from Wisconsin to Colorado. If your US geography isn't very good, that's halfway across the country or a 22-hour drive. My mom said she would drive with me because 22 hours is a long time by yourself, except for she's a terrible navigator. So she said, if you'll navigate, I will drive. So I said, okay, that's fine. However, because it was 22 hours, we left at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I was very tired and fell asleep in the first stretch of the drive. So when I woke up 4 hours later, I realized that my mom had taken the highway from our house the exact wrong direction. So instead of heading straight west towards Colorado, we had gone straight east. So we were in Indiana when we were supposed to be in Iowa. So very different states. They sound kind of similar, but they are not near each other. So I woke up very confused. And as you can imagine, it made for an exceptionally long day of driving. We had eight hours to our drive. And so here we were in this unexpected place, unexpected for me. And she obviously didn't have great US geography either, and that Indiana's not on the way to Colorado. But Joseph too finds himself in an unexpected place. Okay, this is the last section I'm going to read from Genesis. So Genesis 37, verse 26. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he's our own brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the well and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. So I was like, what is 20 shekels of silver? I'm not very good with shekels, that number. So I looked it up. It's 400 US dollars, 291 pounds, and 332 euros. Okay, so that's what 20 shekels is. So he was sold for those amounts. So Joseph is in a place he never wanted to end up. He's in Egypt. He's left his homeland, and I would say that often happens to us too. So what do we do when we find ourselves lost, on a different course than we planned, or feeling trapped? So I have three thoughts. We remember where God has taken us and how he showed up in the past. We look for God in the present. And then finally, we choose connection instead of cynicism. So I'll say those again one more time. So we remember where God has taken us and how he showed up in the past. We look for God in the present, and we choose connection instead of cynicism. So when I reread Joseph's story, I've been reading it a lot of times over and over for the last few weeks, I began to see all these little notes of redemption. So when he's lost, a farmer finds him and asks where he needs to go, and then the farmer takes him there. When he's thrown in a pit, all his brothers want to kill him, but one, Reuben, says, "We can't do that." And then when he ends up as a slave, he is not put to work in a field or he's building buildings. That's how most slaves are used. Instead, he's made a servant in one of the most powerful households in Egypt. So he was probably living pretty well as far as servants in Egypt. He's fed well. He has, room to sleep. He's not in terrible conditions. And then finally, when he finds himself without a family, he finds himself in God. So the things that had once hindered him, his dreams, his trying to take over leadership, his not knowing how to serve, he learns to use for good and for God in Egypt. So in a couple of moments, I'm going to have us make our own maps of the places we've felt lost and the moments we've felt right and found. Probably I'd suggest you make your map sometime since university. If you were out of university a long time, maybe just the last couple of years. If you're recently out of university, it could be a few months. So they don't have to be literal maps, but representations. And I'm going to actually show you my map as an example. So these maps are sort of like what we've heard Joseph, okay? So let me see. I'm going to share my screen with you all. Oh, the host is disabled share screening, sharing screens with Steve. Can you undisable that?
I've done it.
Okay, all right. Open this up. All right. Share screen. Sorry. Just move Zoom over. Okay, do you guys see that map? Can you see that? Above Steve maybe now? Okay. Is that clear, the map? Okay, I hope that it is. So I'm showing you just a little map of my own that I created to just kind of as an example map. Okay, so I was thinking about it. I just did this morning. You don't need to create your maps on the computer or anything like that. You can just draw them out. But I was thinking about my own life, and this is just over the last year and a half. So things that were difficult and places that I needed to kind of see the Lord move in. So first, COVID, right? Everybody here has had some experience with COVID.
I don't think anyone can see your map, Beth.
Oh, they can't.
It's invisible.
Oh no. Okay.
You have to share the screen.
I have. Can you see it now?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay. All right. I'll just start that over. Okay. So there's my map. You all can see that now. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Okay. So top of my map, COVID. Everybody's had experience with COVID. So that's something that we've all had a difficulty. I put the difficulties in red here, the moments that have been hard. So actually before COVID happened, on the left, you see a picture. This was the person that I was closest to in the world, and she died suddenly of brain cancer. So of course, this is hard and sad, and I didn't know what to do. So I found myself feeling lost. Next, you can see this is not quite to scale. I have the US a bit larger than it actually is, and the UK a little smaller, and they're not that close, unfortunately. But I was supposed to come to the UK for the year, and I was really looking forward to it. And then I actually moved out of my apartment, and I sold all my furniture, which it turns out was a big mistake, because 2 weeks later, my university said, never mind, we're not doing sabbaticals this year. So then I had no apartment and no furniture. And my plans to go to the UK were kind of dashed, at least for a little while. And then one more thing happened more recently. I put a car here because when I was moving back into Grand Rapids, I started having all of this pain in my back. It started like near Chicago, which is about halfway through my drive. And by the time I made it to Michigan, I was having to stop every mile. So what was supposed to be like a 5 or 6 hour drive took 12 hours, I think, because I stopped at every exit to lie down on my back before I could keep driving. So I had this kind of unexpected thing. And then in the fall, after that happened with my back, I started having these panic attacks, which I had not had before. It was totally new for me. And what I would find out later, which I didn't know then, was that I had two tumors in my back that were pressing against my back that were causing all of this pain. So as you can imagine, I thought, this is not what I wanted my year to look like. I wanted to be like happily in the UK, traveling, not dealing with like back surgeries and doctors and things like that. So those are some of the kind of difficult things. But there have been some real moments of redemption. So that's the kind of last thing I want to mention. So I had been praying for 6 years, as long as I'd been in Michigan, for community, and I had not found good community here. Churches are huge here, 5,000 to 10,000 people for most churches. So it's very hard to meet anyone. And so one of the things that happened really fast is that my friends, old friends, started calling me a lot. So after Anna died, my friends Sarita and Louisa, who are pictured on the far left of my screen, started calling me every day. And we became really close. So for 6 months, they called every day. Second thing that happened, you see a picture of me in the middle that says, I think it says something like, you are the only one here, because I'm in a Zoom room by myself. But before that, when I had to switch to teaching again, when I wasn't planning to be teaching, I found that actually this has been my best year of teaching. Students have really wanted to connect and talk, and it feels like God has really moved in students' lives. So it's been a really wonderful year of teaching. So I've connected with students. Now I have a picture of my doctor, Sarah Carnett. So I found a great doctor, a great counselor. Again, people that I didn't know in Michigan that have been a huge help. And then the last thing is my neighbor's house. So I became, during COVID, very close with my neighbors, and we kind of developed the COVID bubble. And suddenly I was part of this really vibrant and lovely community. So that's my map. So I've seen, some hard things, but I've also seen God move. Okay, I'm gonna stop screen sharing there. So I just want to kind of talk to you a little bit about maps. So we're going to have you create maps too. I don't know how long Steve wants to spend on this. I'll leave this up to him. But I'd love if you could just put at least a few, 3 or 4 things that have been difficult and 3 or 4 things where you've seen God work. And one last thing I want to say is that even though sometimes it feels like God has left us, he is not. And Joseph would find that out later, that he hasn't left us in the hard places or the joyful places, either us or Joseph. So after we make our maps, then we will split into small groups to talk about them a little bit. A couple questions that you could be thinking about with your small groups. What was maybe one hard thing from your map, one joyful thing from your map, or you can share more than that if you like. Is there anything about Joseph's story that reminds you of your own? And then a third question, is there any way our group or the navigators could help you? So we have this kind of new, Steve starting this new ministry. So is there anything that you feel like would be helpful for you? So that's it for me.